Hi readers, I picked a favorite story for you today. It is called The Biggest Pumpkin Ever by Stephen Kroll. I read this book every October. It's one of my favorites. I don't have any pumpkins in my house though to have near me when I'm reading it, except the fake pumpkins behind me. I have no real pumpkins this year. I didn't have any grow in my garden. I didn't have any grow in Papa's garden that he gave me. So I have no pumpkins yet. I know I can still get some. Here's the story. Once there were two mice who fell in love with the same pumpkin. I wonder if you know this story. Clayton, the house mouse, noticed it one day in the vegetable garden. It was still little and green, but Clayton thought he could make it grow really big. It might even be big enough to win the grand prize at the town's pumpkin contest. There he is dreaming about his pumpkin. Desmond, the field mouse, discovered the pumpkin the same day. He thought if he helped it grow, it could become the biggest jack-o'-lantern in the neighborhood. Would you grow a pumpkin to win a prize or to make a jack-o'-lantern? Excuse me. That afternoon, Clayton watered the pumpkin. He also mixed up some fertilizer of manure and water and spread the mixture around the pumpkin to make it grow. There he is. That very same night, Desmond went into the garden. He watered the pumpkin too. He also spread some manure around it. Both had the same idea. The next day, Clayton watered and fertilized the pumpkin again, and the next night, Desmond did the same. And the pumpkin began to grow. By the end of the month, but the pumpkin was so large, Clayton could hardly believe his eyes. It's a fast-growing pumpkin. My goodness, said Clayton's mother, and it's not even fully grown. Clayton shrugged. All I do is water it, he said. Clayton's mother whispered in his ear, if you want the pumpkin to grow bigger faster, you should use sugar water. That night, Desmond brought his brother Morris to see the pumpkin. Morris knew everything there was about growing things. That's some pumpkin, he said. Desmond shrugged. All I do is water it, he said. Morris whispered in his ear. You should try using sugar water, he said. I've never used sugar water in my garden. I'll try that idea. The next day, Clayton dug a small hole beside the pumpkin vine. In the hole, he placed a bowl full of sugar water. He cut the vine a few inches from the pumpkin. In the cut, he put one end of a piece of candle wick. Then he put the other in the bowl of sugar water. That shows how they're connected. That night, on the other side of the pumpkin, Desmond did exactly the same thing. Within a week, the pumpkin was twice the size it had been. Within 2 weeks, it was absolutely enormous. Clayton was amazed. He ran down the road and peered into his friend Jimmy's pumpkin patch. The pumpkin Jimmy was growing for the contest looked much smaller. Clayton scratched his head. I have an amazing pumpkin, he said out loud. I think I'm going to win the contest. That night, Desmond and his brother Morris spent a long time looking at the pumpkin. How do you think it got that big? Desmond asked. Morris shrugged. A little luck, a little skill. It's going to make a great jack-o'-lantern, said Desmond. It sure is, said Morris. I bet it would have a lot of pumpkin seeds inside. A week later, Clayton noticed the pumpkin was bigger than the family car. During the day, everyone he knew came to admire it. And at night, all the field mouse gathered around to do the same. By now, summer was almost over. In a week, the pumpkin would be full grown and start turning yellowish and then orange. A few weeks after that, it would be ripe and ready for the pumpkin contest. Clayton could hardly wait. The pumpkin was growing so fast it would soon be larger than his house. Then he had a terrible thought. What if the pumpkin was so big he couldn't get it to the contest? It wouldn't fit in his little red wagon. It wouldn't even fit in the truck. Clayton decided to worry about that when the time came. If you haven't read this story, maybe you could think of some ideas of how they could get a ginormous pumpkin to the town. That night, the weather grew colder. Thinking there might be an early frost, Clayton rushed out to the pumpkin with his blanket, but one was not enough. Soon he rushed back and forth, carrying all the blankets from the house. As he worked, he hummed a little song, and as he hummed, he heard someone else singing. He also began to realize that someone else was covering the pumpkin with blankets. Desmond, too, had seen the danger of an early frost. He, too, had brought blankets for the pumpkin, and as he worked, he sang a little song. As he sang, he began to realize that someone else was working and humming. Clayton stopped humming. He put down his pile of blankets and peered around the corner of the pumpkin. Desmond stopped singing. He put down his blankets and peered around the corner of the pumpkin. The two of them bumped heads and fell down. "You've been feeding the pumpkin," they said at the same time. "That's why it got so big," they said. And then they burst out laughing. Glad they finally found each other. When everything had been explained, Clayton said, "I know I'll win the contest if I can get the pumpkin to town." Desmond smiled. "I'll help you. Just let me carve the pumpkin into a jack-o'-lantern for Halloween when the contest is over." "It's a deal," said Clayton. "A deal," said Desmond, and they shook on it. The morning of the contest was bright and sunny. Mice were bringing their pumpkins to the town square by truck, car, and wagon. Some of them were even rolling on the ground. You ready to see how they get the big pumpkin there? Suddenly, they all stopped short. Over the fields came the biggest pumpkin anyone had ever seen. It was being pulled by 100 field mice on motorcycles. Teamwork right there. When the pumpkin reached town, it was too big for any of the streets. Clayton had to explain why they couldn't bring it to the square. The mayor understood at once. He led the crowd to the giant pumpkin and pinned the first prize ribbon on its side. Then everyone danced around it. "Who would have believed this?" said Clayton as he danced. "Who would have believed this?" said Desmond at the same moment. They're kind of like twins or best friends, keep saying things at the same time. When the celebration was over, the 100 field mice pulled the pumpkin back to the field. The day before Halloween, they carved it into the best jack-o'-lantern ever. Ooh, and look, there's all the seeds. I knew there would be a lot of seeds in that pumpkin. Do you see the candle? And on Halloween night, its wonderful smiling face could be seen glowing miles away. Super fun. The kids are all going to visit the big giant pumpkin. I hope you enjoyed the biggest pumpkin ever. I wonder how big the pumpkins you have are, if you have any. I have a few little pumpkins in my classroom. I don't know that I'm going to get the biggest pumpkin ever for my house, but maybe I'll get a regular sized pumpkin. I hope you're having a great October. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I'll see you soon. Bye, readers.